Hello guys, this is our third video in the Coding 1 series. We're going to introduce the idea of divs, classes, the display property, the minimum width property, and the link element from HTML. So to start, I'll move on to this page here. This is a simple web page, very similar to what we worked on last week. I included a few more elements, like a logo up here, more links in the list, 3 images instead of 1, and the same 3 paragraphs. So we're going to turn this into a designed, better looking page by using CSS and HTML. So here we go. This is the page, this is the code for the page. You all know how to do this. We'll start by adding a style, but we'll do it in a different way than what we've been doing previously. We're going to create a style sheet. A style sheet is a page, document, that contains the styles for a page, and you link it to the page. So I'll start with this element, link, and then relationship. It's a style sheet. So rel style sheet, and the type is text/CSS. Again, CSS means cascading style sheet, and the address where the page is, the same as for images with href. I'm going to put it in the same folder where this page is, and I'm going to call it stylesheet.css. So this will bring a style sheet to this page. Now I need to create that style sheet. So I'll go up here, create a new file from template, and create it as a CSS file. File name, I'm going to call it stylesheet.css. As usual, the extension is very important. It needs to be called stylesheet.css. So here we go. I have a blank sheet, and I'm going to start by declaring the typography. So we've been taking a look informally at a service offered by Google called Google Fonts. You can go by typing google.com/fonts in your browser, and I already know which fonts I'm going to use, so you can select your own, but what I'm going to do now is just add the fonts by looking for them by name. I'm going to use a font that I like very much called Robotos Lab. I add it to my collection right there, and also a font called Lusitana. It's one of my favorite serif fonts. It works very well on the web, in my opinion, so I'm going to use those 3. Once I have selected them here, you can see them in the collection. I can use the review tab to check what they look like in different contexts. Roboto, I'm mostly going to use it for headlines, so this is what it would look like. And Lusitana, I'm going to use it for paragraphs, and that's what it would look like. So I'll go here to the Use tab, select all the fonts that I want. I'll bring all the different styles available for these fonts, and I'll use them with an import. So I'll click here on this import section. I'll just copy it and paste it in my code in Komodo. So here we are, Command C to copy. I'll go to Komodo and paste it here. First thing in my CSS will be the font. So I'll make this a lot bigger for you guys to be able to read it well on the screen. And there we are, it's gigantic. And now I'll start with my CSS. All I have here is a separate sheet, a separate page that works as the style sheet for everything in my page. So I'll start creating the styles. First, I'll reset all the margins and paddings for the page using the star, the asterisk. That means everything in the page. I'm going to make the margin equals to 0 and the padding be equal to 0 too. So all the default HTML paddings and margins are gone, and I can set them all manually exactly the way I want them in my page. I think that'll be okay. It's not that big. So I'll start by defining some elements for the body. For the body, I'm going to give it a font family The standard font family for most of my page is going to be Lusitana. So in quotation marks, I write the name of the font. And to fall back for cases in which Lusitana is not available on Google for some reason, maybe you don't have a good connection or something went wrong with the link, I'll just tell it this is a serif font and it'll use the default serif font. And the standard font size, I'm going to use 16 pixels. That is very typical. 16 pixels is almost the standard now in the web. And let's reload the page and see what I did and how that will affect. As you can see here, right now, my page is using a sans serif font. If I reload it, now that I have created the style sheet and that the style sheet is linked to my page through this statement here, link rel style sheet, type text CSS, href, this is wrong. It's not going to work. Now that I have written down the equal sign, it's going to work. So style sheet dot CSS, I save it, I save the style sheet, and I reload the page here. Now you can see this is Lusitana, and down here it's Lusitana, the typography I've defined in my CSS. So I'm going to keep writing my CSS to define some of the main elements of my page. I'm going to define together all the headers. I'm not going to use anything past level 3 header, so I'm going to tell this to be Roboto Slab. Roboto Slab, and then it's going to be a sans serif. There's going to be a serif in this case. Roboto is actually a slab rather than a serif, but I'll use the serif type. And finally, the font size. I'm going to define it using a unit that we haven't used before, but it's a very cool unit. The unit for typographies I'm using here is M's. One M is actually the width of the letter M based on the standard size I've defined. So now that I've defined 16 pixels as the font size for everything in the body, I can tell H1, H2, and H3 to be 2 M's in size. Let's see how this affects what we have here. I don't have any titles here using those styles, so it won't make a difference. But I'll use styles later, so I'm defining them so far. Remember CSS syntax. Now we're going to start with a new element. We spoke in our last video of how we can create an element called, of how everything in CSS, is inside a box. We can create our own boxes, and to do that we use the div. A div is a box that I create myself. So I'm going to create a div, and I'm going to call it nav underscore section. And this div, Komodo immediately writes the closing for me. I'm going to copy it here, right under what I'm going to use as the navigation section. The navigation section is going to be a top navigation bar in my design. So to do this, I'm going to define things inside this box. So take a look at this. Everything from this div to this div below is inside the box that was defined by my, by my div tag. So all this is contained by a div called nav section. The ID of a div, and this is very important, needs to be unique. That means you cannot call two divs the same way. So I call the div here in the page, in the HTML, and then in the style sheet I can use the sharp sign. So sharp nav underscore section, the name I gave my div in the HTML, and now I can define elements for this. I'm going to change the font for my navigation. The font family for everything is going to be Roboto Slab. Instead of having Lusitana for some things and Roboto for others, I'm going to have Roboto for everything, and it's a serif font. And I'm going to make it 100% the width of the page. So this box is going to be 100%, and it's going to be white. So I'll define a background color of sharp FFF, which means white. You can also do FFF, FFF. It's the same for these colors that have all the same the same code all over. Now, in the div, and this is very cool, I can define specific things about this div. So I'm going to define the H1 for the nav section. So any H1 in the nav section is gonna be like this. So I just write nav section space H1, and this will affect every H1 contained in that box called nav section. In this case, I'm just going to define a padding of 10 pixels all over. So I'll do for the nav section, I'm going to do for the H1 10 pixels all over. So 10 pixels, 10 pixels, 10 pixels, and 10 pixels. The order is top, right, bottom, left. It goes clockwise starting on the top. So top, right, bottom, left. And now that I've defined these elements, why did I do it here? Because my image is inside an H1, my logo. And take a look at this. Here's a new attribute that I'm assigning to this element called alt. Alt is an alternative text that only shows up if there is a problem with the rest. So here we are, it's okay, and we'll keep working on setting up my nav section. So I'll define more elements for my nav section. I also need to define what the lists are like. So for the lists in my nav section, what lists do I have here? There's this list that will become the navigation menu. So I need to make this list that right now looks like this, one thing under the other, move so they go one next to the other and they don't have those dots that don't look so nice and don't work for a navigation menu. So I'll start with a UL by, since I removed all the margins from the page up here in my star statement, I'm going to add a padding. Now the padding I do want is a padding of nothing, 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 but 10 pixels on the left side, so it's not right over there. And also for the UL, I'm going to define a background color of black. Black is 0, 0, 0, and there we are. So my nav section right now, if I reload, will have a black background. There we are. It's working. That's what I just created. It's 100%. It has, but I still have lots of problems. The links don't look well. They're still one after the other. They still have that decoration, that bullet. I want to remove that bullet. I want to make them align where I want them. So I'm going to change the list elements, the style for the list elements in this section, and I'm going to do that by, I'm going to change the font size. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, 1.1 em, a little bit bigger than the 16 pixels normal size. I'm going to change the list style and none. What this does is remove this bullet here. So I've saved, I'll reload this page, and there you are, the bullet is disappeared. And finally, I am going to add a few important elements here. I'm going to add a margin that works on the right. Since I'm going to align one next to the other, I don't want them to be like this. I want a small space between one and the other. That space is going to be 10 pixels. So I'm going to do 10, I'm going to do 0, 10 pixels, 0, 0. Remember, top, right, bottom, left. So there we are, there's a margin now, and you can't see much difference so far. And here comes the most important part here. I'm going to define the color. That's the color of the text. It's going to be white, so I can see it with that black background. And a new property. This is the display property. In this case, I'm going to use display inline block. and see what's happening now. By default, lists have a display block property. That's what they are created by the browser. That's how they're read by the browser. One block means, and you can see it here on the screen, that this element occupies the whole page. This is the list element, and the block goes all the way to the right. You cannot place other elements here next to it because it's a block, and that's what display block means. But what we're going to do is change this property to display inline block. And inline block will do is, what the inline block will do is move the element so the box doesn't go all the way to the right, but stops where the element stops, where the box where the element stops. There we are. See what happened? Now we have elements are next to each other. If I make this bigger, then this element will be able to fit here, but they still look blue, even though I told them to be white. I said color white. What's the problem? Can you figure it out? Think about it for a minute, and I'll tell you how to fix it right after this tag. So I'm going to define a new element for the nav section. So those elements in the list, they are not only list elements, see? They are links. They are within a element, a tags. So what I'm going to do here is define a style for those A's. So nav section A, I'm going to make the color white using FFF, and now I'll reload the page, and there you are, it's fixed. But I don't want them to have that traditional underline because it doesn't look good in my navigation. So I'm going to change the text decoration to none, and there we are. The underline disappeared, even though I have links. I can use them as links. See, my cursor changes into a small hand once I do it. I think this is a little bit too big. I'm not going to change anything for the font size. I'm going to leave it like that. It's a little bit smaller. It still looks good, but it's a little bit smaller. It's okay. And I've defined the A, so my links are now white. Finally, I'm going to make the link color change when I roll my cursor over it. That's a property called hover. So I define the A and the hover property of the A, and I'm going to change a few things. I'm going to change the background color to be a blue color, an orange color that is in my palette for my site, one of the ones I defined. It's EF840F. I got that from Color Picker, as we did it in the previous video, and see what happens now. I'll reload. It looks the same, except if I roll over, there you go. It turns into a good orange that looks nice. So that's my navigation section. I am done creating this navigation bar, but I still have a problem here. This is too high. I don't want that to be that high. I need to define this image. So I'm going to create a class. Classes are similar to divs in that you can create as many as you want, but the difference is that you can use a class many times, and you can use many classes on the same element. I'll create a class, and I'm going to call it, let me see, I want to do it exactly as the example you have on the web. So I'm going to call it dot logo. Every class is defined with the dot and then the name of the class. Now I'm going to call it logo, the class called logo. And here, all I'm going to do is define the height. It's going to be 80 pixels, and the width for the logo. So once I put the class logo to anything, it's going to be 80 pixels high and auto width that adjusts to make the image proportional. So I'm going to add that class here to my logo. This image is my logo, and I've hard-coded here the width, the height. So I'm going to remove that height and I'm going to add the tag class. I can put it anywhere, but I like to put it right next to the declaration of the element. So class equals, and the name I gave it, logo. So, oh, there you are, logo. Now that I have the class, this is not going to look very different, but I've already got my logo right there with the correct size. And now I'm going to move back and organize my content. So first I'll create a div for the content. Right after this closing, I'll add a new div and call it content, div ID content. And I'm going to move the closing tag to the end of my page, at the end of the content. There we are. So everything here, from here up to the closing of the tag, is contained by the box, by the div called content. And I'm going to now write some styles for this content div. So how do I do that? I'm going to do it here to be organized and have all the divs together. I'm going to call it content. And for the content, I'm going to define a few elements. I'm going to define the margin, open curly brace, there you are. I'm going to define a margin for the body, for the content area. That is going to be 25 pixels in the top, 25 pixels from the border of the previous element, that's the navigation bar, 25 pixels, then 10 on the right, and 15 on the bottom and 10 on the left, so it looks proportional right there. That's for my content. That's it. So now you're going to see how this adds the margins that I've just saved. Save here, reload, and it moved to the 15 and to the others. I'm going to remove these classes here. They were just an example of how to use it. And I'm going to create a special class for these images. These images are going to be there in the home page, and I'm going to call them highlight images. So I'll add the class. I can create it here first and then in the CSS. There's no prescribed order. So I'm going to call it highlight image. And I'm going to add these class to all these elements here by copying and pasting. There we are, highlight image. So now I'll create this class here to make it work. Highlight underscore image. And for these, there you are, mistype. Now it works. Highlight image. And I'm going to make them just, where is my, here we are. I'm going to give them a border that is 5 pixels, that is solid, and that is black. So now each one of those images, with review, will have a border. There you are. But they're too close together. So I'm going to separate them a little bit with a margin that separates them from every other element in the page. A margin for the box of each image that is going to be 25 pixels. Oh, that's too much, I think. Yeah, I'm going to make it a little smaller. Maybe 15. Yeah, that looks okay. 15 pixels. And now they have a border. They are 15 pixels separated from the rest of everything in the page. And I'm going to define a width so I can upload images with any width and have them auto adjust. So I want these to be 300 pixels wide and to adjust the height automatically to that height. So, oh, there we are. So let's reload these pages. There we are. They're moving down because it's a fluid design, so they're a little bit too big. I'll make them a little bit smaller, say 250. There we are, I think that looks better. But, oh, that's a real size. I had it zoomed in. So 300 is okay. I'll go back to 300. So 300 pixels, there we are. And for the content that I made smaller, I'm going to change that a little bit. So I'm going to define the texts for the content. That is the div content, and every p element contained in the content is going to be sized to 1.2 em. Let's see how big that is. That looks okay. And I'm going to make the nav section a bit bigger. Nav section list, nav section, there we are, font family. I'm going to make the font size 1.2 em, 1.3 em, so they look a little bit more like titles. Yeah, that's okay, a little bit bigger. My images are right here, but those images have a problem. If I reduce the size of my browser, they're going to move down. The same with my navigation here. See how it adjusts? So I want the images to stay horizontal. I'm going to make a div for those images. You can have divs inside divs. So here in the content, I'm going to create a new section called a new div ID called highlight images. See how this is different from the class, huh? This is called highlight images, and I call the class highlight image. They need to be different. So I'll do this to make it align correctly. And for these highlight images, I am going to create a style here in the div section of my styles. So sharp sign or pound sign, pound, highlight images, and what I'm going to do is very simple here. I'm going to define a minimum width. So the minimum width will be 1280 pixels. That's long. I'm exaggerating a little bit. I'm going to make it 1000. So with 1000 pixels, that'll fit most computer screens, and I'm actually not thinking about the mobile devices. So, oh, I broke it. Min width 1000 pixels. What did I do wrong? 1000 pixels, colon, and oh, I didn't open this curly brace. So open curly brace, close curly brace, there we are, perfect. And now it's okay. So the images are now inside a div. That doesn't let them become smaller, but that's still too small. Yeah, I'll have to go bigger. About 1100. If I do 1100, I'll reload, make my window smaller. There you are. So they won't go down because the minimum width for all this is 1100 pixels. The minimum width for this box that contains all three. So that works well. So far, you should be able to use these elements to create a simple navigation and use this important display property to make elements move from displaying them as a block, one after the other, to displaying them one next to the other as an inline block that occupies only the width of the file.